Okay, so today I want to talk about core beliefs and why it's important to understand what they are and what core beliefs you may have and how core beliefs are found and made. So, core beliefs are something that gets developed when you're a child. And it's how, so there's three main core beliefs, and it's how you view yourself, other people, and the world. And these get formed between the ages of 3 to 7. And it's your child mind or psyche starting to get grounded in reality, because you're kind of coming out of this like psychedelic child state where everything's just crazy, and you're starting to really develop ideas of yourself, other people, and the world. And what ends up happening is, based on the environment that you're living in, the people you're interacting with, your world that you're living in, and how you're perceived in that world, you're either going to form negative core beliefs or you're going to form positive core beliefs. And core beliefs end up getting formed, and then they get solidified in your psyche or your subconscious, in your mind. And then they act as like this lens, and they get solidified to then they end up dictating your behaviors all throughout your life of how you view yourself, other people, and the world. So it becomes a lens that you see all these things through. And what's important to understand is that if you have positive core beliefs, you're going to go through life, feeling confident about yourself. You're going to understand other people and trust them and have, the core belief that other people are good. And you're also going to go through the world seeing the world in a positive way. The world is a safe place. There's a lot of joy and laughter throughout the world. And you're ultimately, positive core beliefs are really, it's like the wings that will carry you through life. This will really propel you throughout life. And you'll meet people, that grew up in a positive environment when they were children. And they are inherently positive people, and life does work out for them. But for those of us, like me, that grew up in terrible, shitty environments when you were a child, especially if you experienced any kind of trauma or abuse, you are going to form negative core beliefs. And when you form negative core beliefs, that's like the dead weight that you have to carry for your entire life. And these negative core beliefs will dictate how you think about yourself, how you think about other people, and how you think about the world. So for me, I formed negative core beliefs about all those things. So, when I was a kid, I grew up in a emotionally toxic environment with a narcissist mother, an enabler father, and a golden child brother, and I was the scapegoat. So as a child, it was drilled into me, all these negative things about myself. It was repeated to me that I'm not good enough. It was through the gaslighting and the emotional manipulative behavior was, no one will love me unless I change myself. It all had to do with I could never represent who I was. I always would have to put on this kind of false persona. I would have to take on character traits of other people. And these were feelings and beliefs that got implanted in me as a child. As I'm forming my core beliefs, a huge negative one was all about myself. Like, basically, who you really are is not good enough, and you need to you can never show that to anyone. You have to keep that guarded, and you need to, really what ended up happening was I kind of became this chameleon, where when I would find myself in situations where I'd meet new people, or if I were, in like a group of people that I wanted to fit in and belong with, is I would just adapt their behavior, and I would mimic what they did, or I would try to guess and then take on what I felt they were into. If like I was trying to hang out with a group of guys and they were really into sports, I would act like I was really into sports, and I would learn all about sports, and it really fueled me to become this kind of chameleon. And I did that forever. And not, and it really, it didn't change until I woke up to all the emotional and mental abuse I experienced as a child. And I could finally break free of it. But what's important to understand is if you're not aware of these core beliefs, then these core beliefs dictate your behaviors. So for so many years, and this happened, this is like 30 years of me just being a chameleon throughout my life, never really just being myself. Relating to other people, inherently I was, I didn't trust people. When it came to, that was more like when I was in friendships with guys. I never really trusted people. But it's kind of strange when you grow up in a narcissistic environment and then you're under the spell and the trauma bond, because the spell of the trauma bond really manipulates how you relate to other people. So the fact that I didn't trust people, the trauma bond where I would bond to people who treated me like shit, it was like my negative core belief about other people, that kind of got thrown out the window. And I would find myself bonding to people that made me feel comfortable in the abuse I experienced as a child. So that's really interesting, thinking about that in relating to, negative core belief of how I felt about other people. But I would definitely around like, guy friends and stuff, I would never really felt like I could trust them. So that really, that hindered me, of course, from having relationships with good people, and of course, trauma bonding to more narcissistically abusive people. That hindered me as well. But the negative belief I had around the world was just, it's a dangerous place, and don't go out into the world. I remember when I was graduating high school, I had started playing music, and I was really into the mandolin. And I was playing the mandolin a ton. I was really into it. And I really wanted to go to Italy to learn about the mandolin, because that's where it's from. And I told my folks, I want to, after high school, I want to fly over to Europe and busk on the street and travel around and go to Italy and all these different places and learn about music and, just have a good time. And of course, because it was this toxic environment, what do you think the reaction was? It was, oh, you're going to get robbed. Or I remember my folks were like, you're going to get stabbed. Someone's going to stab you and steal your mandolin. And, that sucks, man, when you're a kid, to think about, going out into the world and you're going to get robbed and possibly killed, which isn't true. And so, with that negative core belief of the world is such a shitty place, then, I never ventured out. I just always stayed in my little hometown, close to the Narce family. And, I just got a job in a grocery store and then kind of just used that little town as my world. I mean, that was my only world. And, that's incredibly limiting point of view for life. So the important thing to understand is that negative core beliefs can dictate your choices and the decisions you make throughout your life if you let them. That's the whole thing. The most important part about this to understand is that if you're just on autopilot and you're just going through life, these core beliefs that are solidified in your subconscious, in your mind, in your psyche, are going to be the lens that you're going to be making all your decisions through. And, if your mindset in life is just like, life is just happening and I'm just, I'm like a boat, in the water just being pushed by the wind, then your negative core beliefs will absolutely dictate the decisions that you make in life. But, once I started to figure out that, I had issues and, emotional problems, issues from past abuse, and started to move through those and understand them and shed the light on them and then grow from them, the big things that kept coming up, I realized were my core beliefs. So if you're in the process of, understanding what you experienced as a child or throughout your life, and you're coming to terms with that, and you've made the decision to, like, I don't want to live by that anymore, then it's important to understand what your core beliefs are, because once you're cognizant of that, then you begin to make your own decisions about specifically who you are and how you view yourself. You can make your decisions about how you want to relate to other people, and you can make your decisions about how you want to go out into the world. And the trick to all that is practicing the skill of being an observer of yourself. So there's two main skills, and I've really leaned on these. These have been really important for me in my journey, and building a new life from all that terrible trauma experience, coming out of it and building something new. You have to learn how to start observing yourself and observing your emotions and your reactions and your decisions, especially around, once I became aware of what the core beliefs are, because that's the whole thing. You might not even be aware that the core beliefs are a thing. Once I became aware of that, then I could observe myself, with when I get myself into situations where, like, what is the thought that's going to repeat in your mind about, like, oh, this person can never love me, or I'm not good enough to be their friend, or, I'm going to get robbed if I go to Mexico, or, or this person's shady because, they're asking me questions. You start observing that behavior, and then you can start to understand it. That's the whole thing is, you really want to get to the truth of all this, and you want to become aware. And once you can observe that behavior and then see how you're reacting, and ultimately, what decision you'll make, that's when you get empowered to start making the decision for yourself. Because look into core beliefs, and it is like a rabbit hole in the world of psychology. Because, I reference psychology a lot because psychology, for the last 100 years has sought to, like, really understand the human mind and the human psyche and what drives us, our attitudes, our behaviors, all these things. And there's a wealth of knowledge to draw from the world of psychology. But on the flip side of that, the world of psychology is incredibly dark and very demonic. And if you get swallowed up into that world, if you think that psychology is going to solve your problems, it's not. You have to realize you are the only one who can solve your problems. That's the bottom line. And so, if you enter into a relationship with a psychologist, in my opinion, it's a one-sided relationship. Because if psychology existed to make you better, then they would all be out of business. And, that's something to think about. There are a ton of psychologists that are all in business and doing great. And especially when you look into changing core beliefs using psychology, it is like so much work. And I could see if I were a psychologist, and I had a patient that wanted to change their core beliefs, yeah, they'd be paying me a ton of money and spending a ton of time with me. And, that would, I think that's the wrong way to go. What has worked for me is practicing observing my emotions, understanding what my core beliefs are, consciously making the decision of how I want to relate to those core beliefs. Because you don't have to live by those. You can simply accept the fact that, yeah, I grew up in an emotionally toxic environment that made me develop, these negative core beliefs. And it's okay. And you can accept that. And I've accepted it. And rather than letting those dictate and govern all the decisions I make about who I am as a person, what other people are like, and what the world around me is like, I'm not going to let that happen. I'm going to be cognizant and aware of my own ability to make my own decisions. And that's what I've done. And since I've made that choice, life has gotten a lot easier. And it's not to say that you just have to be this wide open person that's trusting of everyone and, lets everyone in the door and just wanders out, into the open world, like nothing bad will happen. No, you still have to be aware of good and bad and dangerous situations, of course. But it certainly allowed me to be open, especially to meeting new people and allowing me to just be myself around new people. Now, I have done one thing where I've kind of, so I've noticed with the negative core beliefs is there's a lot of energy behind these core beliefs. For example, with me, the belief that I'm not good enough. And I worked tirelessly to change myself so I would be good enough in the eyes of these people. And, I developed that chameleon kind of lifestyle. One thing that I have done recently and has really been positive is I've leveraged the power behind that core belief where, so recently, okay, I just met a friend of mine, or this guy that I became friends with. He is a retired executive for a big company. And he's a boomer, and he's got, he did really well for himself. And I really, this is someone who I admire. Like, I respect this guy, I look up to him, and I really want him to like me. I want to be friends with him because he has like so much knowledge to offer, and he's lived a really interesting life. So when I met him, I was just myself. I'm not trying to change myself. I'm not doing my chameleon thing, but I still want this guy to like me. So what I did was, he was in a very specific industry. He was in semiconductors. And I don't know if you know about what semiconductors are, but they have to do with electronics and cell phones and computers, and they're like really, really important. So what I did was I decided to learn everything I could learn about semiconductors, and I used the momentum and power that I had behind that negative core belief that fueled me for so many years to change who I was. I leveraged that power to use it as a mechanism to fully delve into the world of semiconductors. And believe me, I learned a lot. And then what I did was, the next time we met, I had all this interesting information to share and relate to him with, because he's like a tech guy. I know about tech, but I'm not really a tech guy. I'm like a philosopher guy. But anyway, I used that momentum and energy behind that negative core belief that I'm not good enough, and I leveraged it into learning and educating myself about semiconductors, and then being able to have a conversation with him about something that he's really interested in, to in turn get him to like me more, which it absolutely worked. And that's an interesting example of this concept, and I've spoken about this before, of how do we take the concept of energy being objective. Energy is not good or bad. It's all in where that energy is focused. So I focus the energy in a negative way for so many years of trying to change myself because I thought I wasn't good enough. But then I used that same momentum and that same energy to then focus it into knowledge and learning and bettering myself by understanding something more in order to get someone to relate to me better. And it's kind of it's kind of esoteric, but it's really interesting to think about of leveraging the energy and power behind a negative core belief and using it, as a way to empower yourself, to educate yourself, and like really broaden, your scope of knowledge. That's exactly what I did. And I used that energy behind that negative core belief to do it, because I really wanted this guy to like me, and I wanted to relate to him on a level that him and I could bond over. And it absolutely worked. And I feel that was a win. That was a positive way to use to transform something negative into a positive. So anyway, the core beliefs, it's really important, especially if you want to move on from all this and you want to stop dragging that dead weight. And the main decisions to make around this is, number one, be conscious of all your decisions. Practice that skill, being the conscious decision maker. I'm going to be aware of the decisions I make. The second one is just practice being the observer. Observe yourself and try to understand the emotions and feelings that are coming up throughout your day, throughout your week, and how you're relating to other people, yourself and the world. And then the other thing you can really do is try to figure out what your core beliefs are, and all you have to really do is just think about yourself, and then the first voice that pops up in your head, that will be your core belief of how you feel about yourself. The next with other people, and the next with the world, and really get clear with what those are, because that's going to give you the understanding. That's going to be your awareness that you can start deciding to either these are going to dictate my life, or I'm going to just accept them and kind of leave that negative baggage behind and move on and start making my own decisions about who I am, how I feel about other people, and how I feel about my environment and the world around me. So that's why it's really important to understand core beliefs. So I hope this was helpful. And as always, I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.